Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Ahlulbayt Live, a weekly show discussing some of the social issues affecting our youth, families and communities. Tonight on Ahlulbayt Live, we're discussing about the development in our communities, the growth, the concept of development in our communities. Do our communities need to undergo reformation? Tonight on Ahlulbayt Live, I'm delighted to be joined by Sheikh Jaffer Ladak. Sheikh, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And our second lovely guest is Sister Ruhi. Rizvi, Sister, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to Ahlulbayt TV. And as always, a kind note to our viewers that you can participate in the show. Give us a call 0203 411 7842, or you can text us 07506 842 842, or you can tweet us at Ahlulbayt TV. All methods of communication should be made available on your screens as we speak, as the program runs throughout this evening. Okay, Sheikh, now let's move on straight on to the topic of our discussion. So, do our communities need reformation? What kind of reformation are we talking about here?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I would change the word slightly,
Okay.
and I would not necessarily across the board use the word reformation, because that would indicate that we're in a position where something is wrong, where something is backward, or something fundamentally is a problem. I would probably adopt the word evolution, because as society continues to evolve, as the challenges continue to evolve, as the psychology of society continues to evolve, then in coordination with the general position of humanity, the general position of a society, so should we be able to move in accordance with the challenges of the time, the structures, the means, not just from the negative but also the positive perspective. As a simple example, obviously, we have a wonderful channel like Ahlulbayt TV. As media becomes more and more intrinsic as part of our development, as TV and so on and so forth, we need to adopt to those methods. So I would say yes, we do now require a serious reflection on where we are as a community. We have to talk about leadership, we have to talk about targets, we have to talk about direction, but I would phrase it under the umbrella of the word evolution as opposed to reformation.
Sure. Okay. Sister Ruhi, before we sort of delve into the topic into more detail, I understand that you are the founder of Project Zainab. So for the benefit of our viewers, could you just tell us what Project Zainab is?
Project Zainab is a new direction towards bridging the gap between parents and their children. Likewise, it's a direction of involving support from professionals to guide the young youth. It works with females. It empowers the females to become confident, become more self-worthy, gain respect from others. It teaches them to learn about themselves. It teaches them to be the women that we require today, but working in the West. It's important that we empower these women, because obviously we're living in the West, and not everybody knows what their Islamic role is or duties are as females.
Okay. So as the founder of Project Zainab, did you set this up as a result of thinking that we as a community need to evolve, as Sheikh mentioned?
Yeah, I think evolve is the perfect word, because as time has passed, there's a decline in attitudes and behaviours, and attitudes have changed towards the way we see each other, the way we behave with each other. And I think in time, what's happened is in the last couple of decades, especially with so much of the name or the word Muslim being given to ourselves, and the way it's highlighted on media, we've got a lot of negative connotations to that. So what we need to do is actually, when we talk about the word evolve, is to sort of work with that in parallel and align ourselves to making those changes within ourselves, within the community. As rightfully as Sheikh has pointed out, evolving actually means that we were something for a different era. We are now coming into something that is completely different to what we were. My parents, how they brought me up, years back is now totally different to how I would bring up my own children. So it is about evolving.
Okay, Sheikh, now let's move on, therefore, regarding this term evolution, change. What sort of change in specific examples, in specific areas, would you recommend or would you consider the community to move towards?
The first thing for us is at various levels of functionality, as a global group of Muslims, as a continental group, and then as you become more granular into the locality of your own community, it is important for us to take stock of where we are and what we've achieved, the things that are fundamentally shackling us, and ultimately the idealistic goals that we want to achieve over a period of time. So I'll divide this into two points, and we present our thought process from the Holy Quran. So the first thing for us to realize is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has presented us so many examples within the Holy Quran for us to reflect on. So with that, the story of Banu Israel is mentioned so often. And when you reflect upon the story of Banu Israel, you see as a community, they became very shackled psychologically as to where they were and did not allow themselves to break forward and grow into their own situation beyond what they already were. The Holy Quran talks about the difficulties that Fir'aun placed upon them. So for example, he would kill the children, he would kill the male children, he would enslave the women and children. This impacted their psychology for a period of time. So when eventually Musa alayhi salam freed them at all levels, intellectually, morally, spiritually, a principle was supposed to be that they moved on from where they were. They didn't retain the state in which they were from 50 or 100 years ago. They understood the challenges were different. They understood their expectations should have been different, and they moved in accordance with those circumstances. So when it came to things like the food that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had gifted them, they preferred to retain the food that Fir'aun had been feeding them, as opposed to move forward in time. It's just a principle of thought. Similarly, in our own communities, we have all come from various backgrounds. We have come from East Africa, we've come from the Indian subcontinent, we've come from Iraq or from Iran. And exponentially we've grown through this world, times have changed, and therefore the same way we adopt things like the pulpit, the programming, the leadership style, the madrasa system, are we supposed to still base those things on the way in which we retained them successfully 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, or principally in accordance with the new structure of the world, the new challenges we face, we should bring our systems up in accordance with those challenges and even look forward to them and look forward as to what, instead of being reactive, look as to where we want to be in 20 years' time and create a system in accordance with that, whatever that might be. So, just as an example, the pulpit.
Yep.
Does the pulpit and its methodology need to remain stagnant in accordance with what worked in Pakistan, what worked in Mombasa, what worked in Basra? Or is it need to be in accordance with the circumstance of the 21st century, the challenges of today, and so on and so forth? This is the first thing. This is the reflective side. The second side of it is that we, again, looking at it from the Quranic perspective and the prophetic personality, we need to become very acquainted as to how the Holy Prophet of Islam, Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, created a successful community. He had in Medina Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, hypocrites, lovers of Ahlulbayt, the whole spectrum of people. And with that spectrum of people, he had to govern them and get the best out of them. So how did he do it? Principally, he did one thing. He created a trajectory of growth over a period of time. There was never a time when the Muslim community was the same as they were yesterday. Hence, every time they asked a new question, a new verse was revealed. A new era was brought into place. The Prophet started with a community that was down here, and he had a goal. I have prophethood for 23 years. By the time I pass away, I need to get my community to this. Yes? So for example, many verses, but I'll just bring two to conclude this point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the community he came to in Hijaz at a point in time. For example, in Surah Al-Hijr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lambasts his community. And he says, فَلَعَمْرُكَ إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَكْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Surely these people, they're wandering blindly in their intoxication. After a few years with the Prophet, the community had become so God-centric that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised them to the hill by saying, Kuntum khayrun ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You're the best of people amongst the whole of mankind. He took them from here to here in the space of a few years. Rasulullah had targets. He understood the circumstance of the people. He understood what he needed to do to bring them out of darkness into light. Our fundamental discussion is this. When we talk about our leadership, when we talk about our pulpits, when we talk about our TV stations, when we talk about the books that we are writing, how much of it is trajectory based in accordance with understanding where we are and what the targets are for our community in 20 years' time to where we want to get to? Based on that, all the issues of how we interact with non-Muslims, how we interact with our Shia brethren, our Sunni brethren, and so on and so forth, all of that falls underneath the concept of where we are today and where we want to get to in 20 years' time. Fundamentally, the evolution comes from those things. And based on that, we start to identify the key wins.
Okay, so when you speak of leadership, I mean, just to understand you better, do you mean leadership from our scholars, the ulama, or leadership of those who are the presidents of the jamaats that we go to on a weekly basis?
Both, and the leadership of our various societies and the various groups that we have created, be it MCB or be it the ABSOCs.
Yeah.
We're talking about the leadership that needs to be aware at a genuine level of the challenges that are facing the community and what structural changes they want to implement so that we have measurable, discernible growth.
Yep.
Let me put it to you this way. Pick a community. I'm from Milton Keynes. For the sake, I'm just picking Milton Keynes. Can Milton Keynes or any community in the world identify how it has grown intellectually, morally, tangibly, in all of its facets over the last 5 years? And then we talk about expanding that into how our Shia community of all cultures has grown in terms of the media in the last 10 years. Have we?
Are you asking how they can know that they've grown or not?
Well, we need to identify that. Have we? This is the tangible question. If we can't identify that my community, in terms of its attendance, in terms of its intellectual acumen, in terms of its moral output, in terms of its ability to make an impact in its local community, has not made any discernible movement in the last 5 years, then ultimately we need to point fingers at the ulama, at the leadership of the community, and ask what was achieved, all that khums money, all that time and effort, what tangibly was achieved. So based on that, these are the sorts of fundamental questions we need to ask ourselves. We can't retain the psychological infrastructure that like the Banu Israel did, that they retained and wanted to keep themselves within the shackles of what was imposed upon them by Fir'aun. Similarly, we can't be the same as what we were 50 years ago.
Right.
Number one. And number two, we need to understand that the Prophet created a plan of growth within his community. The question I pose is, what is our plan of growth over the next 20 years in our community here in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Europe?
Just to ask one of our viewers this question that has just come through actually, the concept of reformation, when you ask how can we tell whether or not a community has evolved, as it were, one viewer asks, one person's definition or perception of reformation may be different from another person's. How do you reconcile those?
We have the Holy Quran and the prophetic example. So let me give a simple example. Take again any community. My respective viewers, where you are at home, take your community and pose yourself this question. If your community, your Imam Bargha, your Husseiniya, your masjid was to close down tomorrow and it was to move to another part of the country, another part of the city, would the community immediately surrounding your center miss you? Or would they celebrate that you have gone? Would they care? Would it impact them in any way? Would anyone notice it? Would anyone feel saddened by it? When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed from this world, look at the impact, the loss it was upon his own community. Because he had changed their lives for the positive. Communities, we are in this country a third, fourth generation community. Yet, In terms of the local community, if you were to move our mosque out of the place it is located to another place in the same city, the local community would not miss us in most masjids, because we haven't impacted them positively in any way, shape or form.
When you say local community, do you mean the non-Muslims or those who don't attend the mosques? Is that what you're saying?
Local community by and large.
Okay.
Non-Muslims, the people in the local streets who live there, the Sunni community, the Shia community of another culture, of another country from your own community. Have we impacted positively in any way, shape or form? These are measurable questions. So when you talk about a community, what the Prophet did was, he absolved it intellectually. He brought people forward intellectually. He made sure women were given authority and rights. He made sure the local community of any faith were uplifted by virtue of his presence. These are measurables. Religion is supposed to do this for us. Religion is supposed to ensure that a community is looked after, that people who are in a state of poverty are no longer poor. People who are uneducated are now educated. Where there's oppression, oppression is removed. Our community can measure its success in accordance with these things. When our Thursday night programs retain the same formalized structure as what they did 50 years ago, and you see an attendance dwindling from 500 to 100 over a period of 10 years, you know your community is not successful. And these are the things we're not talking about. We're not challenging these preconceptions. We're not challenging the fundamentals of what we're doing. To think about whether it's actually meeting the need of the time.
Let me ask Ruhi Aunty about this particular topic or this particular point regarding evolution and how we can measure change. You are from East London, right?
I am, yes.
And have you not seen the community evolve in East London?
If you want to put it this way, have I seen changes in terms of input from the community itself attending Thursday nights and Tuesday nights in madrasas? Yes, that's changed. That's a positive change.
Okay.
What I haven't seen is the fact that some of the underlying issues are being resolved. There are underlying issues in the community which get swept under the carpet and they just stay there because people are so reluctant to actually get up and do something about those. Whether it be East London or whether it be a different part of the globe, there are some issues that are subjected that actually require resolution, and yet those issues are always swept under the carpet. What my argument is based on is the fact that there are so many issues that are never brought to the pulpit. And if they are brought to the pulpit, there are inexperienced scholars or alims who have no idea how to actually resolve those issues. What we need to be doing as a community, or what part of East London, whether it be East London or South London or West London, or whatever part of London, there are changes. There are some positive changes, but as Sheikh said, that they can be measurable. But what isn't measurable is the amount of social issues that are just not coming to the forefront. Either because there's a stigma attached, or because people feel that they can't resolve those issues, or they're better left inside a closet. So those will never be measurable. What people need to do is actually look down, or actually look at these issues from a different perspective, from a different angle, and say, okay, regardless of how many years of training the scholars have had, they need to now take up something different in terms of actually supporting the community in a more proactive way. Right. That would be measurable. And the only way that would be measurable is when people like myself, who are on the, see things from the grassroots and say, okay, we've got these sort of issues happening in schools, we've got these things happening in the mosques, but there are people who are asking me to resolve those issues because they feel that they can't approach an alim, then there's something definitely wrong there.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much indeed. There are plenty of your views that I will inshallah read out after the break. Fantastic comments being received via Facebook, Twitter and via the emails. So we'll read them out after the very short break. We're back in roughly 2 or 3 minutes time, so very shortly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Ahlulbayt Live. We're discussing about the development in our communities. Do our communities need to undergo not reformation but evolution, as mentioned by Sheikh Jaffer Ladak earlier? Okay, so time to read out some of your questions and your comments. So before we move on to the questions, let me just read out some of your tweets, your views via Facebook and via email. One viewer says we don't need reformation or evolution as such, rather a nudge back to the teachings of the Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam. I'm not saying he further says we need to stop idolizing our scholars and stop worshipping them and use our minds a little bit more. I'm not saying we should become an ayatollah, but we do, however, need to read a few books on the core principles of faith. Revive reading the Holy Quran. Most of us haven't ever read a translation from cover to cover, let alone a tafsir. Very valid point that we need to start becoming more of a reading community. Sadly, the number of people who engage in reading is deteriorating, I understand, as the months and years go by. If I'm wrong, of course, do call in and challenge me on that. Another particular viewer says, of course, they understand Sheikh Jaffer Ladak's views regarding foresightedness, and the viewer says we need to have a foresight to look at problem areas with anticipated remedies. So we should have a foresight to look at what problems may exist in the future and anticipate remedies for them. Compromise is a lose-lose situation. I'm not sure what you mean by the last particular sentence, so if you are watching, please call us and share your views regarding that in a bit more detail. Okay, so just asking you the questions, Sheikh, from our viewers. One viewer is asking, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ask the Sheikh, how do we measure the growth that he has been talking about?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So firstly, we need to identify within our own communities what the shortcomings are, what the strengths are. I mean, so far we've talked very negatively, and as I said, we don't need to have a negative undertone, because I think our forefathers have established so much and great success has been achieved, and we need to laud them for that. But based upon where we are and the shortcomings that we may have within our community, once we identify those, then we can create the bridges towards our ultimate achievements. Simple. We can start with things like the attendance within our community. So pick a number and say your community is currently having X on a Thursday night, Y on a makhsus night, compared to Z on the night of Ashura. Yes, so we have a trajectory of the various numbers that attend. So what is it that we want to do in order to increase that number, right? So on a Thursday night, we need to have a target over 2 years to double our attendance. And on a makhsus night, we have to double our attendance. Now we have our targets. We need to think about how we're going to achieve that. So we now talk about the various facets. We talk about, for example, the identification of those groups and individuals that may not attend. So the resident alim, the managing committee have a responsibility to reach out to those people and find out what it is that does not attract them to the community. Is it the speaker? Is it the type of lecture? Is it the topic? Is it the environment? Is it the lack of interaction? What is it that we're not doing correctly? We have our local community, that the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah community. We have the non-Muslim community. How much, I mean, we tend to create these one-off, three-off, five-off per year interfaith and intrafaith dialogues. That is wholly it is unachieving. It doesn't achieve the actual desire of what our community is supposed to be as an inclusive, mature community that extends its arms constantly to other people. So from the beginning, we assess where we are, where we want to get to, and then we identify all the facets that we need to do to achieve that. So once we've identified one, we can go on to several others. You mentioned earlier on, just after the break, one of the most important fundamental points about our community: we're not a reading community. We are a community that by and large has become dependent upon the pulpit.
And therefore what Speaker X says and teaches me on a Thursday night, on a makhsus night, is sufficient to condition me for the rest of my week. That is not sufficient. It is not sufficient. A reading community, an intellectual community, an analytical community is the one that is based upon the teachings of Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salam and Imam Jaffer Sadiq alayhi salam, where they could discuss any topic, and it wasn't something that was shied away upon from the pulpits. Today our communities, instead of being analytical, instead of bringing discussions that the other communities are talking about, we shy away and have it in baraza, so that any Tom, Dick and Harry can put forth their opinion. As opposed to saying that historically the pulpit is the place of intellectual acumen, and therefore instead of shying away from philosophical discussion, instead of shying away from discussions on marja'iyya in leadership, instead of shying away from discussions on the role of a woman in a community, instead of shying away from discussions on pluralism, we bring it to the pulpit, and the floor knows that this is an intellectual place of discussion. We are not here to arouse sectarian hatred. We're not here to arouse, wahwa for the sake of, screaming out, these things. The community needs to mold itself in accordance with the time in which we live in.
Yeah, but one might argue that the floor is comprised of people with different age groups, people of different sects, people from different backgrounds and cultures. So when you're talking about the role of women in the community, how's that going to help a child who's 7-year-old attending a program on a Thursday night?
Well, I could pose that question and say, well, how about the historical role of Harun al-Rashid? How does that help a 7-year-old child? It does, doesn't it? Because that person still learns about oppression, leadership, the rights of Ahlulbayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, historical context. So what we're saying is that whatever the challenges are of today, and as one of the viewers fantastically said, I don't remember the exact words that he or she said, but we have that longevity, we understand what's coming, that foresightedness, ahsantum. So we talk about what's present today, what we envisage is coming tomorrow, and through that the pulpits, and I'm not picking on the pulpit per se, I'm talking about the general concept of the foresighted nature that our community in leadership is supposed to have. The question that you posed is, what measurables do we have? How do we instruct that? The community needs to measure where it's at, where it wants to get to, have specific targets, just like it does have a budget, and then ultimately create, and the alim and the managing committee are tasked with achieving those targets. Instead of saying, currently, that our annual report says the budget is X, we stayed within budget, we're now in the black and not red, and that's how we measure success. It should be, how many people were not coming to the community but now regularly are? How many families are now reading regularly on their own instead of where they were 2 years ago and not doing? These sorts of things are measurable, we implement, and you will see the growth, the seed is sowed, and you will see that plant inshallah tomorrow.
So Ruhi, let me ask you this question. I mean, Sheikh is talking about numbers here. Do you agree, perhaps, maybe not, that the lifestyle that we lead, especially in the West, or maybe even because the world is becoming, a global community in general, that the lifestyle we live nowadays, going to work, etc., is becoming so tiresome that we tend to, as Sheikh mentioned earlier, that we tend to rely only the scholar and what he says on the pulpit as like our tablet for the whole week. So if you look at it from a practical perspective, right? People work from 9 to 5. They come back from work. They're tired. They want to spend time with their families. They want to catch up with what's been happening at home. They haven't got that time to read about Islam. We mentioned that people are as a result, of moving in time, that people are becoming less of a reading community. Do you think that the lifestyle we lead has an effect on that?
The lifestyle that we lead, it is hectic. It is very tiresome. But at the end of the day, if you're a family who's comprises of children, then the children have their needs. Okay, where we are going wrong is the fact that we are not taking out time for them. Work, responsibilities, everything else we're taking care of. The only thing that we seem to be depriving is the needs of the children. And this is where I see the huge gaps are building, continuously building, because we're so chasing after money, looking after our mortgages and everything else, that we seem to be depriving our children, neglecting their needs in terms of their social needs, their emotional needs, and their health needs. In the same way, what I see is that when parents are neglecting those needs, then these children are actually, or these young people that have the needs, are not able to discuss certain aspects of their lives or their needs with their parents, and they are now discussing them with people who are not their parents. And that's where I feel quite irritated, basically, because I find that sometimes these children or these young people don't know who their friend is, or who are they befriending. We can always be chasing after money, but the money is running faster than we are. And I think the time constraints that we have, if we are not attending any of these madrasas for our children, or we're not attending the majalises, or we're not attending Tuesday nights or the Thursday nights at Islamic centres, or whatever what's available to us, then these children are missing out on a great deal of social aspect for themselves, and they are not going to be gaining anything but neglect.
Do you mind if I pose a question back to you?
Sure.
Because I think your question is a wonderful one.
Yeah.
1400 years ago, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, was the community also not having to work 9 to 5? Weren't their jobs tougher than ours? Are you talking about that they lived in an Arabian desert, that they were travelers, nomadic by nature? They lived in the blazing heat of an Arabian desert. Yep. Were their lives not comparable in that sense, that they also had difficulties, that they also had to bear children and put food on the table and keep their house above them? But they did it. So it was about prioritization, and it was about a structure and balance within the soul that emanated, that expressed that balance into their own life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in Quran. For example, He says, He is the one who has created the night litaskanu, so for peace and serenity, for rest. So that in that time, when you come home from your 9 to 5, you're supposed to take time for yourself to nurture your soul, to nurture your family, to nurture your community. Yeah. What we tend to do, and I've made this point before, and I would like to reiterate it if you don't mind, I feel, for many of us, and I include myself here before I include anyone else, that we as a community, as a Shia community, are indistinguishable from others, genuinely. The one major difference from us is that we attend makhsus occasions in the masjid. But if you picked a handful of random people from the community and a handful of random people from our communities, and you quizzed them about the lifestyle, about their direction, about what they eat, about what they dress like, about what TV they watch, about their standard day, about the things that they're interested in, we are engaged as much as they are to the majority of things. When Oscar Pistorius, is that how you pronounce his name? Oscar Pistorius, thank you very much. When this trial becomes the headline news, and for some reason it makes a difference to some people's world, to the average Shia, we are also seeing that it makes a difference to them as well. They become as engaged in this celebrity trial, and they know the ins and outs. When a new TV program comes on, the average Shia will be as much included in this new Big Brother show or Survivor show or something. And it's for the majority of us. We're indistinguishable. We were never meant to be like that. The Shia community was supposed to be a cut above the rest. Now, the fact that we've become so saturated into the normative workaday society, that means we do not leave ourselves time for spiritual development, for social nourishing, and so on and so forth. This is the fundamental problem that we need to address within our communities. I
have a rebuttal for that, but I'll keep that aside for now because we have a caller on the line, so we'll take that call first. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam. I just want to, sorry, I've just tuned in, so I'm not sure whether you've covered this topic already.
Sure.
But I just want to say that, do you think our Islamic centres should be take more of a social, more of a role in trying to help the social problems in our society and the wider society? Things like homelessness, elderly people who are alone, people that might need help, soup kitchens, that kind of thing. I mean, do you think it's great the lectures we have and obviously all the programs we have, which are really getting better and better, but I do feel that, you know, maybe we've got this gap where we're not doing enough on the social side of things to help our communities.
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very valid point. And in fact, we haven't discussed that as yet, but we'll do in a very short while. But while you're on the line, sister, if I can ask you, in the centre that you go to, I mean, just to pick a question out of the hat here, have you noticed any reformation or any evolution over the last couple of years?
No, not really. You see, I go to different centres.
Right.
I think the only centre where I've seen a change for the positive has been probably the Stanmore Centre, where they're proactively engaging the youth. But I think our youth are really neglected in all the centres, apart from Stanmore, where they have those Stanmore Jaffries. And I think a lot of the very traditional centres, which I'm sorry to say it, but some of the alims there, the resident alims, cannot even speak English, and they're not addressing the social problems, they're not addressing the problems of the youth, and I think this is a real big problem, and it's kind of storing up problems for the future. And I think the youth in particular are being neglected in our communities.
Fantastic.
As well as the vulnerable.
Sure, wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, sister, for your kind views, your comments, and of course your question. We'll get to the sister's question after the break, in fact, because it's one of the areas that we need to discuss as part of the program. So if I can ask the dear sister to please carry on watching the channel, and then of course we'll be entering that particular area of discussion in a short while. And she's also spoken about youth being neglected and alims not being able to speak the language of the land, and of course these are all areas that we need to discuss in greater detail, but we'll do in a very short while, so we'll hold that thought aside. So we were discussing from our end regarding, sorry, I got sidetracked. About the lifestyle.
Lack of time.
And then
lifestyle. And I was posing the question back and saying, well, throughout history we've always had to put food on the table, and it's always been the 9 to 5. It's in some concept or the other, and we need to be able to prioritize the nourishment within the community. One of my bed bugs of the community in general is that we appear to be fairly indistinguishable from the average person within the community. And if it wasn't for the Ovid program of going to Istishhad program with Imam Baqir alayhi salam, we would be fairly indistinguishable from the average person within the society.
Right. And I did say that I have a rebuttal, but or just a point to counter that. It's not really a rebuttal, but just a point along those lines. And then you mentioned that how the Muslim, the common Muslim, in comparison with a member of the public, how we're so related to each other in terms of
caught up in the day-to-day,
knowing about the day-to-day
workaday world.
Absolutely. Now, do you not think that this is as a result of cohesion? You know, when you spoke about earlier that how many times do we have members of the other faiths participating in our community work, etc., etc., etc. So do you not think that as a result of us being united, you know, living in a society where people are one, these things can tend to happen?
That's a beautiful question. Go back again. I always say this, just we have to either find an answer from the Quran, or we have to find it from the example of the life of the Prophet.
Okay.
One of those two things as a starting position. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated his community from Mecca to Medina, the success, the trajectory of success it had was because all those Muslims were pulling in a direction. So everyone did something, no matter how small it was, for the community's upliftment and welfare. Everybody picked up a stone and with their own hands built Masjid Nabawi. Yes, but they also mixed with the greater Madinan society, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, and so on and so forth. But the reason why the community was so successful was because they all pulled in that one direction. Everyone gave something, 5 minutes of their time, an hour a day, something towards their community. Our problem is that our communities are left to run by a small number of people that always tend to be serving. They will serve in the madrasa, they'll change to become presidents, they'll be hoovering, but it's the same proportion that is always serving in the community, 5%, 10%, 20%. As Islam, and it goes actually back to the sister's fantastic call, we are all supposed to be serving some way. When I say community, I don't mean Shia Masjid Husseiniya. I'm talking about community. Everybody is supposed to be doing something, giving something, instead of coming home, switching on the TV and falling into some sort of intellectual drunken stupor, whereby the TV molds our mind and eating and then sleeping and waking up for work and then the next day. And there's nothing happening in that sense. So here, the fundamental needs to change from within the fabric of the family itself. That the family needs to become a giving family, a family and a community that feels like they are serving in some way, shape or form. If we are not serving, if after 6 months I can't find that I have done something for my local community to bring them up through homelessness, through removing poverty, through education, helping the needs of local women, serving the local Husseiniya, then I have to ask myself, what have I been doing in the last 6 months? I'm not basing myself. So the answer is to always go back to the prophetic way.
Sure. In fact, one of our viewers has just sort of emailed us this particular statement. It says, today our communities have various experts. Engage them and create a think tank to generate ideas of reformations.
Fantastic.
Or of course, I think as Sheikh's words, evolution. So engage them and create a think tank to generate ideas of evolution to be in sync with various technological advancements. The Prophet, peace upon him, showed us practically how to generate revenues by taking a trading caravan to Syria. Develop entrepreneurship in our community. Business transactions should be more within the community to grow community resources. Finally, he writes about the point of trust. A bond of trust has to be developed amongst various sectors of the community, and communication is also very, very key. This is the key to a stable relationship. Effective communication is important at every very level. Oh, well, fantastic. Three to four points mentioned by the viewer. Sister, just moving on to the same sort of sticking on the same topic, because we have roughly about 5 minutes before we end before we move on to the next segment of the show, which is the third and last part of the program. So sticking on the topic of reformation and the type of reformation, you have three wonderful children. 4? I don't know.
5.
MashaAllah. Okay, the ones that I'm aware of are I think 3 to 4. So I wasn't sure that you had 5. MashaAllah. Okay, so in terms of the 5 wonderful children that you have in your family, do you think that they feel connected to go to the mosque, as Sheikh mentioned? Have they ever come up to you and complained to you, oh mum, what was this topic about in mosque today? Why do we have to go to mosque? As a parent, do you feel that children argue with you when going to mosque? Do you have to convince them to go to mosque?
I've been fortunate because I've sort of grown up with my own kids. So what we've tend to do is the children have actually wanted to go out and socialise, but the best way to form that sort of social circle is to actually attend programmes. You have to be with them, you have to be a part of them, you have to acknowledge that if they have a need of befriending somebody, then perhaps you should take them with you to those areas. And what we've found is that when we've been to the mosque together and the girls have wanted to go to a certain programme, we'll discuss during the week. We'll say, well, during this day, obviously it's going to be very, very difficult, but at the end of the week, this is what's happening. This event is on in this area. This event is happening in that area. Where should we go today? So you sit down, you discuss that with your children, and they are, they'll be more than obliged that you're offering them a choice, but 2, you're also, with them in whatever they want to do too. And that's how I found that, my children, if I wanted to be a part of an organisation or work for something, they've come with me. I've taken them with me, and we've gone through that journey. We're taking them on a long journey, which says that, there are more important needs.
Sure.
And it's not just our household needs, it's the needs of the community. Sure. Let's come and work for this community. Let's work for that part of the community. Let's focus on that need of the community. So they've come with me. I'm taking them on a journey, and they know that journey doesn't end.
The sister who called in just a while ago raised a very important question about the alims in our mosque not speaking the English language, and she felt that youths in today's day and age are being neglected. Do you feel the same?
Oh, absolutely. They have huge issues. When Project Zainab went out, when it was incepted, I had young brothers who came to me and said, Auntie, can you do something for us brothers, for us young men as well? And I said, you know what, don't lose hope. Inshallah, we can have a Project Abbas, yeah, because it will compromise and it will, you know, work parallel with Project Zainab. If Project Zainab will fulfill the needs of the social needs of the young ladies, then inshallah Project Abbas will work hand in hand.
Yeah.
And inshallah, you know, we are working towards that too. And there are, you know, that men have their needs and young boys have their needs, and they want to be recognized. They want to do something for the community. We have youth. As Sister just mentioned,
Yeah.
you know, youth are only neglected when their needs are not seen to. Okay, these boys are literally calling out and saying, we have a need, we are not seen in the community, we want to be seen, we want to know what our rights are as young men and what our rights aren't as young men.
I'm so sorry, but we have to go for a very short break. Once back, we'll carry on with the sister. And of course, as the caller earlier raised the point about contentious issues and social topical issues being discussed in our mosque. Inshallah, we'll be talking about that in roughly 3 minutes' time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Ahlulbayt Live. This is the third and the last segment of the program this evening. Tonight we're discussing about the need for reformation, the need for evolution in our communities with Sheikh Jaffer Ladak and Sister Ruhi Rizvi. We received a couple of, well, fantastic comments as always during the duration of the program from our viewers watching at home, and a wonderful caller who called in earlier regarding the youth being neglected, and some of the points you raised in her conversation with us was about the necessity of having the communities, the scholars discuss social topics. She mentioned about the issue of poverty, homelessness, but I would like to go a step further and say maybe stuff like Islamic finance, abortion. You know, when was the last time we spoke about what is Islam's perspective in abortion? I mean, there are lots of topics that we face on a day-to-day basis, be it at work or at university, at school. Sheikh, what's your take on that?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The sister called up and mentioned things like, should the Imam Bargha Hussainiyya be more than just a place for lecture hall, Dua Kumail and these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I just picked out a verse as she was speaking, and it's quite fundamental to the concept of what religion is supposed to be. So it's in Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 83 to 85, if the sister at home wants to read it further in detail, but I'll just read a small passage of it. This is one of the covenant that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes with Banu Israel. So it's the fundamentals of what they're expected to achieve. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ لَا تَعْبُدُونَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. We made a covenant that we would not serve any except Allah. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينَ وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. That you should do good to your parents, to your near of kin, to the orphans and to the needy. You shall speak to people in good words, keep up the prayer and the poor rate. So you can see how much of a balance there is between formalized worship, ibadat, of salah, zakah, tawheed, and these matters, as well as the social facets of our religion, looking after the needy, looking after the orphans. And this is a fundamental balance between what our community is supposed to be. And this is what we're talking about. At the top of the show, we said we're a third, fourth generation community now, for example, in the West. We've established all the Hussainiyat and all the Imam Barghas that we'll ever need. Yeah. Really, we don't need to move too much further in that direction. Our finances, our structure needs to now be based upon not establishing ourselves, based upon building upon those achievements. So absolutely, I agree that our centers need to be a place beyond just the need of majalis and dua kumail and these sorts of things. Now, every community has its size, has its strengths, has its financial capacity, and so on and so forth. So you don't have to do these things within the four walls of the Imam Bargha. And this is important because Islam isn't found in the four walls of the Imam Bargha. Islam is found in your reaction to a sin. Islam is found in the middle of the night when you're alone and have the opportunity to converse with your Lord. Islam is found in the school hall or when there's an opportunity to go to the school dance. This is where your Islam is found. And the Islam is so much about bringing that goodness, that fundamental humanity, to those who are less fortunate than you. And if those people are found in the homeless shelters, they are found in hospitals, they are found in libraries where group readings for children is kept, and these sorts of things. So here we need to revamp completely our appreciation for what Islam truly is. Now, there was no need to do that 30 years ago because we needed to establish 4 walls. And this is the point of our discussion. Now we've established 4 walls. Why are we still only establishing 4 walls?
Good point, yeah.
That's the concept that we need to impinge upon the ulama and upon our leadership of our communities.
Here's one for you, Sheikh, and to all those watching at home. The psychologists call this, exactly what you said, as contact theory. This explains the effects that different kinds of interaction have on people's attitudes towards others. The more contact people have with each other, the lesser the effect of stereotypes and prejudices. Open days, cross-cultural awareness workshops, and sports and arts events all are powerful tools for combating ignorance and discrimination. So we should have more contact theory in our Husseiniya, Sheikh.
Removing discrimination is a wonderful, and the sister had, off air, we'd talked about this at some length.
Sister, Ruhi auntie, I mean, if we think of this along the lines of us as members of the community, I mean, Sheikh, let's say we can consider him as a scholar, as an alim of our community. Don't. You are though, Sheikh. If we think along the lines of us being members of that community, do we think that the reformation or the evolution should be brought about from a scholar, from the scholar? He should initiate it, or is it the leader? Where should the initiation come from? Who should show the first step towards reformation or evolution?
Initiation should come from anyone who belongs to a community. Okay? Anyone who feels that there is a need in the community. Anyone who can raise a banner to say that there is an issue in our community and it needs a resolution. We all have a duty towards our community. It doesn't matter whether we're a doctor, nurse, teacher, engineer, biochemist, whatever high post we have, that has no bearing. If we as a person feel that there is a need, it should be addressed, and those needs doesn't come from people. It needs to come from people who are sensitive to those issues, but it also needs to come from, like I said, anyone who's from any background can raise that banner. But if there's professionals out there, there's expertise that's within our community, and we need to all come together as a think tank and perhaps think of ways of dealing with X, Y, Z issues. The issues that you've mentioned, Islamic finance or abortion or domestic violence or whatever, those issues can be resolved by everybody getting together and thinking, well, if it's affecting our community, then we need to do something seriously about it. Because that, leaving those issues lying dormant is not going to help anybody but grow bigger and bigger and until it becomes the cancer of our society.
Okay, so let me just, of course, ask this question to our viewers. Just to remind everyone at home that this is a live program and you can partake in the show. Give us a call 0203 411 7842. The phone lines are open. Of course, we are receiving your comments, your questions via Facebook, Twitter, and via email. I'm flooded with comments, and it's very difficult to pick and choose which to ask the two fantastic guests on screen. So the easiest option for you to get your word across today is for you to pick up the phone and to ask your question, or to just pose your thoughts via the phone line 0203 411 842, or you can text us 07506 842 842. But I'd prefer you to call the studio number 0203 411 842, simply because there's a plethora of comments that we have been receiving over the last hour and a half in regards to the discussions we have been having or holding. Okay, so I've done the reminder as it were. So Sheikh, one viewer has very eloquently mentioned here, fantastic, perfect, a very sensible topic. And of course, sister, as I think exactly you said, regardless of whether you're a Pakistani, a Lebanese, or an Iranian, we all need to participate and serve and bring love and harmony and unity to our community. Thank you very much indeed for this wonderful, wonderful point. But Sheikh, moving on to when I asked the question to the sister about who should show the first step, whether the scholar or the leader. And she said, sister mentioned, anybody in the community. But one viewer says that, the scholar the ulama, the alim should take that first step, simply because it is the alim that we look up to. When he sits on the minbar and he talks about homeless people, or he talks about visiting the poor, or the sick rather, we should see the preacher doing just that in practice. Very rarely do we see a particular scholar who sits on the minbar saying, why don't we organize a visit, a day out to the hospital, for example. So do you not believe, or do you not think that the scholar should take that first action?
I think it's a reconcilable point, in that everybody has their capacity. So whatever is within the capacity of person X, like sister mentioned, someone who's a professional, someone who's a youth, whoever the alim of the community is, they all have their capacity. Their responsibility is never diminished except in accordance with their capacity. Thus, the spiritual father of the community, at his level of authority, at his level of direction, must be the one to demonstrate it to others. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, لِمَّا تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ, why do you say to others that which you don't practice yourself? So the alim himself, if he or she preaches, that person has the fundamental responsibility to practice whatever that they have preached. That doesn't diminish the responsibility from anyone else within the community. On that basis, the alim of the community, and I need to make sure I get these words right, so that no one is offended by what I'm saying. So if I don't communicate it properly, then if you haven't understood it, if someone at home hasn't understood it, then please do call in so I express this. If a person takes the responsibility of being an alim of the community, he goes to Hawza for many years, he is nourishing himself with jurisprudence, he's nourishing himself with thousands of ahadith, with logic, and these sorts of things. But that person has not the soul and the intellectual capacity of that person hasn't grown in the same rate as the level of which he is acquiring in terms of the knowledge, then there's going to be a shortcoming. So it's like saying a doctor knows all of these different procedures, but when it comes to practicing it, he doesn't implement. He doesn't know what to do. You would say that there's an imbalance there, right? You would say that he's not actually, he's learnt the material, yes? He can pass the exam, but when it comes to the implementation of that upon himself and upon the community, there's clearly a shortcoming. In the same way, the alim of the community, there is no point in going to Hawza unless what you're learning nourishes your soul at the same pace of what you're learning. We need to ensure that when ulama and dhakireen come back, all those logical principles that they've been drilled into their head, and I'm speaking at a certain level here to those people who appreciate this, who have gone for those studies, those people who have spent night after night trawling through books of ahadith, that these things aren't just on the tongue, and that this is molded into their personality and thus expressed into the community itself. And this is what we're talking about. For example, and we talked here, the reason why I'm bringing this up is we talked about the levels of responsibility, and I said it's based upon capacity, yes? So for example, as a community, 500,000 of us, we all recite the dua in Shahr Ramadan every day. Allahumma adkhil ala ahli al-qubur as-surur, Allahumma aghni kulla faqir. And our dua is for the poor, for the homeless, for the estranged, for the runaway, for the imprisoned, for the ill, for the Muslimin. Now at the level of capacity of someone who has an hour free per day, their responsibility is to do something in that direction. But for the alim who has spent his or her life dedicated towards understanding Islam, their responsibility exponentially is greater. Fair point? Just like a nurse to a doctor, to a consultant, to the clinical director of a hospital, and so on and so forth. It's all relative. They're all supposed to implement in accordance with their capacity. Yep. In the same way, the ulama of our community today need to take a very long series of reflections upon where the community is at, where it needs to be. Now the ultimate target can only be one thing and one thing only: to be in a position whereby the community can welcome back the awaited savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif. What are those things at all levels that the community needs to be doing to be worthy of his return? How are we supposed to be with our non-Muslim brothers and sisters, our non-Shia brothers and sisters, dealing with the needs of youth, sisters, newlyweds, newly parents, so on and so forth? As we deal with these, then we talked about the social issues of homelessness, poverty, elders, those who are sick. As we begin to understand these issues better, and the concept is the ultimate goal of bringing about the awaited Saviour's return, then we will have understood the responsibilities and the capacities at the ground level and up to the ulama and to the leadership. But that fundamental question about do we even know our responsibilities in accordance with the 10th of March 2014, my question is tangibly and genuinely, how much do we really know? How many leaders can stop and put their hand up and say, I have, in my position as the president of this community, as the secretary of this community, as the mukhi of this community, reflected for 1 hour upon the needs of my community? How many people can truly say that? أفضل العبادة تفكر في الله. The best of action is to ponder upon God and upon His creation. These things are not happening within our community, and thus as an outcome of constantly inheriting that way of thinking, which is not in accordance with the Quranic ethos or the prophetic personality, will only lead us to the situation we're in today. If we don't address it now, 50 years from now, where will we be?
Speaking of leadership, I mean, fantastic words you mentioned there, Sheikh. Now, speaking of leadership, I mean, if you look at the response, again, you speak about responsibility and capacity, right? Not everyone can do anything and everything. You know, everyone's got their own duties and roles and responsibilities. So
Exactly.
when you look at the community, when you look at the Jamaat, for example, right, it has a leader, the president.
Yeah.
The president's role, in essence, is to ensure that the mosque is running. Okay?
Is it?
Well,
That's the fundamental point I'm challenging.
Hold
Is
on.
it?
We can argue. Wait. Let me just finish my point. Okay. The president's role is to ensure that the mosque is opening 7 days a week, or on Thursday nights, and Milad nights, Shahada nights, etc., etc. That the funds are available to ensure that that the mosque is run, it's kept clean, there's niyaz being served. There is an alim also to represent that particular community. Okay. So the president is doing all he can in his capacity, as you mentioned, to ensure that all these tasks are being taken care of and met. So from the president's perspective, he has done his duty, his capacity, as it were. It is now up to the resident alim, up to the scholar, to find out, okay, I have been appointed as an alim of this particular Jamaat. As an alim, it is my duty to, let me ask you this, is it alim's duty to therefore find out where the community should be heading, in which direction it should be heading, how long it will take? Do we need milestones? Is there a litmus test that we can sort of say, okay, you know what, this is stage 1, this is stage 2? Or should all that come from the president, from the leader of the Jamaat?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Both of them have their varied responsibilities, and ultimately they are supposed to be achieving for the one and same goal.
Correct.
So, if the alim who is paid primarily by money which is belonging to Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, he is responsible to how he or she earns every penny that is given to him. And therefore, the problem, as we've been saying, is that our community has not created that direction. So you talked about identification of the problems and then creating that trajectory. That, my honest opinion, has not been happening at the localized, granular levels of our community. And that's the fundamental issue. So there needs to be the identification of the clear goals. For example, the clear goals need to be based on outreach to the non-Muslim community, outreach to the non-Shia community, outreach in terms of social need and development, things to do with the sisters. And therefore the alim and the managing committee have a joint responsibility to manage, to recruit people for that development, and ultimately their success and failure, meaning the president's the managing committee and the ulama of the community, their success and failure is measured by what they have achieved in light of social development, in light of jurisprudential knowledge of their community, in light of the capacity of their youth. At the moment, our communities tend to measure the success of the alim by how good an orator he is from the Thursday night pulpit, or from the makhsus night pulpit, or that he has to deal with divorces and these sorts of things. That's what we've contracted him to do. He has to lead salah 3 times a week. He needs to visit the madrasa. The presidents and communities, like you said, have to open up and close up. They need to make sure there's enough tabarruk to take away. They need to make sure that we have enough money in the coffers. This is things that we needed to do when we established a community 30 years ago.
They're still very important now though, Sheikh.
But that doesn't mean that we don't do those things. We build on those things. Yes?
I agree.
We're an institution.
Yeah.
Yeah? So what was needed 30 years ago cannot be what is needed today, and what is needed in 20 years' time cannot be what it is today. There needs to be that evolution, that growth. So as long as we retain the measure of success based upon how good an orator this man is, and how much he makes us cry, and whether there is enough tabarruk to take away, then we will not understand the reality of the goals of the community. And this is the fundamental thing that we need to be addressing.
Sorry,
Yes.
I've got a point there.
Sure.
It's, I agree with what Sheikh is saying, but the point that came to my head was, if there's an alim or a scholar that is dealing with, say for example, 5 or 6 divorces a day, works out within a week that how many divorces he's managed to carry out, yeah, that being a measurable figure, should enlighten somebody that there's alarm bells should start ringing, right? And that those alarm bells to me would say, well, how comes there are so many, what is the level of divorce? Why are these divorces happening? I would actually look down into saying, are these all based on one area of conflict between the husband and wife? Or is there something else that's going on? Psychologically, when I was actually bringing on Project Zainab, I brought in a lot of issues which made me think about Project Zainab, was that socially, with internet, looking at internet and how images are portrayed on there, those sort of things are causing problems between husband and wife. Not only that, we've got the media issue, we've got pornography issue, we've got domestic violence issues, we've got issues, termination of pregnancy, that is an issue. So if 20 or 30 divorces were happening per week, not all of them could be happening with one issue.
Of course.
Or one issue posing to give rise to that divorce. To me, alarm bells would go off, because I would now want to ascertain, why is there within a certain cultural group that high rate of divorce? Then I would like to establish, or send out an outreach worker, as you said rightfully, to establish what he could do, or find out in what culture what is happening, and perhaps relay back that information, and perhaps now get somebody who's on the ground, who's doing the groundwork, to actually find out what it is that is causing this problem, and how we can actually resolve those issues. Project Zainab looked at one of those issues, and one of those issues was when a young lady continuously puts herself out there on social networking and is continuously chatting with the opposite gender. She has given herself openly a habit of actually chatting with somebody. Once she gets married, she is now married to one male person, and obviously that would be an issue for her, because she's now become so accustomed to spending time chatting with too many men. So one of our issues is to try and resolve those issues first, before it gets to that stage.
Sure.
So we're talking about tackling it at its root.
At its root.
So saying that we recognise that,
Don't
for
put
example,
yourself out
a
there.
community, one of the major community
Absolutely.
challenges is divorces, across the board of reasons.
Absolutely.
And we need to understand why, and then go in and teach from the youth perspective.
Absolutely.
Spouse selection, reconciliation,
Absolutely.
anger management, and these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Sheikh, let me ask you this, and I'd like to hear your views on this as well, is that From a management perspective, a leadership perspective, the president, the resident alim, they've both tried all they can to ensure that the numbers increase day by day, that the numbers don't deteriorate on a Thursday night. Like everyone's doing their own bit. But yet, it's not happening. I mean, what's wrong there? I mean, should there be some sort of motivation thing going on, or what? Should there just be food every week to entice people to come into mosque?
Well, actually, I mean, if a community, and notice I'm not saying alim and managing committee, if a community can say that we are doing our utmost to increase attendance, to attract, to market, to be accessible, and meet the need of the issue, and it's still not working, then it is upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide. As in, we have done our responsibility. As even the Prophet is told in the Holy Quran, it is not upon you to guide everyone. All you can do is deliver the message. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ. All your duty is to actually present the reality of dunya and akhirah. So as long as a community can put its hand on its heart and stand before God on the Day of Judgment and say, then we rely upon God to bring any other fundamental changes.
Ruhi, your thoughts?
We need to eliminate cultural differences, I think, sometimes, and I think a lot of it could be racism, because we all come from all different backgrounds. If we want to attend a mosque that is, the majority of the population of that mosque is, say for example, the Khoja community or perhaps the Arabic community, you need to be welcoming to other communities, and perhaps you might.
Sure.
Can I make a point here? There's an alim of a community.
You have 20 seconds if you can.
There's an alim of a community in North America, and once a month or something like that, goes and visits goes to dinner at people's houses of his own community to get to know them outside of the Imam Bargha, get to know them personally, converse with them. It's a phenomenal step and just demonstrates the way in which the thinking of our time needs to be.
Sheikh, thank you very much. I'm very sorry, but the time is up for this evening. Sister Ruhi, thank you very much indeed for your time as well. Thank you to all of you for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.